Hello and welcome to this episode of Table Space. These episodes are recorded live on Twitter or X. Please follow me, Dylan, at dduyon92 if you would like to listen to these shows live and also be a part of them during our Q&As. Thanks. Enjoy this week's episode. Okay, so we can officially begin. Everyone, welcome to Table Space. This is a podcast hosted by myself, and we have a very special guest today, the Dungeon Delver. So for those of you who don't know, Table Space is a place for all things role-playing games, for us to talk about passions for the hobby, how do we find role-playing games, what do they do for us, and how we use these games to impact not only our lives, but the lives of those around us. So, Dungeon Delver, thank you so much for agreeing to meet with me. I greatly appreciate it.
Dylan, thank you very much for having me. It's good to be here. The Twitter Spaces, or X, I guess I should say, Spaces is new to me. But hey, I'm all about embracing new technologies, particularly when we can bring a passion for tabletop gaming to them.
Awesome. So I guess before we get into it, I'm just kind of curious, are you reading any particular novels right now?
Right now, I am undertaking my yearly rereading of The Lord of the Rings. That just started a few days ago. I prefer to read the book from the fall into the winter, spring. It's not a hey, I got to go get the tires rotated so I can knock this out in an afternoon kind of read. It's something you savor, something you enjoy, and you consume fully every morsel. So that is what is on the plate right now.
Awesome. Another question. This is something I kind of ask, and I plan on asking for each episode. So I'm new to, I guess, Dungeons and Dragons. I've been doing it for 10 years, so I consider that very new compared to some of the veterans here. But for the Advanced Dungeons and Dragons Dungeon Master's Guide, the foreword written by, I forget his name, is it Mike? I can't remember his last name. But it talks about dungeon mastering, and it poses the question, is dungeon mastering an art or a science? I just find that little snippet so fascinating. I've reread it at least once a month, especially whenever I'm finding that I need some inspiration to create or run games. So posing the question to you, what do you see dungeon mastering as? Is it an art? Is it a science? Is it both? What's your take on it?
It is both, but it heavily leans into art. And that is Mike Carr, by the way. Mike Carr is that gentleman's name. And if you ever have a chance, if you go to Gary Con, is anyone out there in the audience, anyone listening, do talk to Mike, if he's around. Dungeon mastering is an art and a science that leans heavily into art. The science of dungeon mastering, what surprises people is there's damn few mechanical rules in the Dungeon Master's Guide. There's combat, and there's rules surrounding those. There's the awarding of experience points, which in itself includes an art. And here's a little bit of trivia for you, Dylan, and for those of you out there who might not know, because I love talking about this. First edition Advanced Dungeons & Dragons was the first and for the longest time the only tabletop role-playing game that gave rewards to characters, or to players rather, for good role play. A lot of people tend to look at it as a very crunchy game that ill-considered, if it considered at all, the activity of role-playing, but it's in there. If you look up XP and gaining levels, how you play your role and how well you play your role should be gauged by the dungeon master and weighed in terms of how long it's going to take you to level up and what it's going to cost you. But to get back to, and that is a perfect example of the mesh point between art and science, because you, the dungeon master, don't just have the task of sorting through and figuring, okay, they fought a red dragon. That was 4758 XP, for the dragon himself. Let's see, John wasn't very engaged. Bethany, however, was, she was in there like Sandal Bergman and Conan the Barbarian, loved every minute of it, always, toe to toe and, there with a good quip. So you might weigh, the second's performance, more than the first performance. You might say, John, you were on your phone and you ask me every round, what do I do now? So yeah, it's going to take you 10 or 14 days to level up, and that's going to cost you more money. But that is the mesh point, one of the many mesh points of the art and the science. And I'm sure you will agree, it leans heavily into the art in that case.
Yeah, thank you so much. That's a very fascinating answer. I kind of want to ask you a side question here.
Of course.
How do you deal with having the party at different levels? Because that's one of the reasons why I wanted to start this podcast, is because there's so many different avenues to not only Dungeons and Dragons, but just this hobby as a whole. And everyone has different ideas and what works and what doesn't. So I'm just curious, because how long have you been in the hobby, by the way?
I first started gaming in 1981.
Wow. Okay.
So it's been a minute. Now, I remember, I have vague memories. I didn't start gaming until we moved down here to Florida. I have vague memories of going into a toy store before we moved to Florida. We lived in a little city in northeast Alabama called Gadsden, and seeing that turquoise box, the Tom Mulvey, Dave Cook edit of Expert D&D, and my little 8 or 9-year-old mind just going, what is that? That looks really cool. I had no idea what it was I was looking at, but it didn't look like any kind of game or book I understood, but I couldn't even, I think for the princely sum of $9.99, it was probably well outside of my means. But yes, when we moved to Florida, some people I went to school with were all about this Dungeons and Dragons thing. And when they let me look through a copy of A2, Secret of the Slaver's Stockade, which I thought was a really cool comic book, I was blown away. I had to get some more of this. And so it was, and so it went.
Wow. Okay. So you kind of fell right into the hobby?
Yes.
And you've actually, because I was looking through your videos, your YouTube videos, which you guys in the audience, you definitely should give Dungeons Delver a subscribe. You spent a lot of time or some time with Gary Gygax himself?
Yes, that's correct. So, to give it a little bit of emotional punch, when we're children, of course, we all want to be something, right? I want to be an astronaut. I want to be a race car driver. I want to be, I want to be a football player. Well, when I was 10 years old and I got my first Dungeons and Dragons books, a copy of Keep on the Borderlands, that was the first D&D book I ever had. I taught myself to play D&D just with the module. I decided I wanted to be part of that. I wanted to play some Dungeons and Dragons, and I wrote a terrible, terrible module and sent it to TSR at the tender age of 11 years old, I think, and of course never heard back from them. But I always wanted to share my imagination with a group in that, with a larger audience in that fashion. And about high school, I set Dungeons and Dragons aside, a mistake in retrospect, but, girls, cars, other considerations. And I didn't really get, now I started role-playing again in 1989, so that was not that big of a stretch. But the group that I gamed with gave zero care about Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, or any Dungeons and Dragons. They wanted to play Hero System, Rollmaster, Call of Cthulhu, MERP. Oh gosh, what else? Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, Star Trek the Role-Playing, basically anything but Dungeons and Dragons, which is fine. Those are all fine games. And so it wasn't until, gosh, I guess probably 1997, I think. So a good 6 or 8 years later until I got back into AD&D, and I was cleaning out boxes. We had moved apartments, and I was cleaning out boxes, and a box of books that I brought from my house when I had moved out of my parents' home in the 90s had followed over a course of a couple of apartments, and I opened one, and there's my copy of Keep on the Borderlands. And I said, gosh, this sure was fun to play D&D, and I just started gathering up books again, and in doing so, I rediscovered my love for the game, and I thought, well, the internet is a thing now. I had been on the internet since 1989, but, the idea of just sending an email out was still kind of a newish idea. So I typed into Alta Vista Search. Yes, it was that long ago. Gary Gygax's email address. I typed that in, and it's G. Gygax at Geneva Online. And I sent him an email, and I said, wow, is this Gary Gygax? And I heard back less than an hour later, yep, it's me. And that was the beginning. That I would just frequently or infrequently interact with Gary on web forums and so on and et cetera. And a few years later, in 2002, I had launched my own little endeavor on the web. And I thought, how cool would it be to interview Gary Gygax? And so I did that. And the audio of it you can hear on my YouTube page. That I actually have an interview with Gary. And it's that interview that I conducted in the fall of 2002. And, we sat and we listened to each other for a good long while. I asked him a bunch of dorky questions, and, I then typed it up. He let me record it because in 2002, an hour conversation, there was no, I'll upload this to the internet, right?
Right.
So, I transcribed it and posted it on my website. And a few years later, Gary started the Yigsburg project with Troll Lord Games and was looking for authors, and I volunteered for that. And then I got into other projects with him, and I met him in 2004 at Milwaukee Game Fest. And then he and Troll Lord Games had a very small convention in Lake Geneva called the Lake Geneva Gaming Convention. And I would periodically go, we would go up 3 years in a row. We went up. Gary passed away before we went up to the third one, but, there were a couple of years when we'd go up, have dinner, and it was good. It was a fun working relationship. I'd like to think we were friends, lowercase f.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. And my next question leading up to that, so I got into Dungeons and Dragons with 5th edition, and I just kind of fell in and started learning and started to pick up as many books as I can from back in the 80s and stuff. And I feel like I have this like nostalgia for a part of this hobby that I wasn't alive for, and I'm just curious, like what was Gary Gygax like in your opinion?
Gary was a perfectly nice guy. Gary and I got along. He was very patient when it came to my writing. He was convivial. A lot of people ask me, Dylan, they say, you gamed with Gary. What's your favorite Gary Gygax story? And I'll tell you this directly. My favorite Gary Gygax story is from the summer of 2006. My wife and I were invited to a dinner party at Gary's house for Lake Geneva Gaming Convention. And if you get to know me, you'll find out I'm a person who hates being late. I would rather be 10 minutes early than 10 seconds late when it comes to arriving places. And so we got there probably 30 minutes before anyone else showed up. And Gary Gygax and his wife then at the time, Gail, were absolutely amazing, gracious hosts for the time we got to sit together. And sitting on his front porch, when Gail found out that my wife was 4 months pregnant at the time, you'd have thought she was a long-lost daughter. Gail doted on Colleen. Do you need, let me get you some water. Gary, put that cigar out. Make sure smoke isn't blowing in Colleen's face. Do you need a fan, sweetie? Just on and on and on. And it was very nice. And, but Gary and I sat and talked about being dads. We didn't talk about, why coins weigh 1.6 ounces. How far can an elf throw a dwarf? What's at the bottom of Castle Greyhawk? We talked about being dads. We talked about the benefits of co-sleeping with your baby or not. We talked about the importance of reading to children. We talked about getting upchucked on. My oldest daughter was 5 at the time, and we talked about shirtless days, and that do you have any kids yourself?
Yeah,
Okay.
I do.
So
a 4-year-old.
the days when you've been upchucked on so many times you just stop changing shirts.
Right.
We talked about those things, and that was my great deep discussion with Gary. It had nothing to do with +1 swords or magic rings or anything like that. It was dad stuff, and it was a great conversation with Gary. So to come back around and to answer your question directly, I found Gary to be an eminently approachable, warm, and friendly person.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I did listen to your interview with him earlier today, just to get like a reminder of everything you talked about. And I'm going to kind of pose the same question to you that you posed to him. Do you see, or I guess as you talked to Gary and went through playing these games, did you see them to still be as prominent, if not even more prominent today, as they were back then?
That's an interesting question. I think Gary, everyone has an image of Gary in their heads. When you reach a certain level of notoriety, everyone crafts an image in their minds of what you're really like. And how things are. There are people who, have cast Gary as the villain in their own mental dramas. There are people who think that that from the creation of TSR in 1970 until he was ignominiously thrown from the building, that he was the tragic hero and nerd Santa Claus to us all. The truth lies somewhere in between. And I think what Gary's perception is to the hobby at large is going to depend on where you go. If you walk the halls of Gen Con, if anyone knows who you're talking about beyond, that guy was on Futurama, then you might get a very neutral-leaning negative opinion. On the other hand, if you go to GaryCon, you're not going to find a single person who doesn't have something positive to say about Gary Gygax. Myself, again, for the time that I knew him, I had a very, 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 very positive experience getting to know Gary, and so I think he's positive. History will be the judge, but I think it will be largely positive because consider this. This is something that my good friend Paul Stormberg, who, by the way, you'd love to talk to Paul. I think Paul would be great. But Paul will straight up tell you there were 5 kinds of table game for 50,000 years of recorded human history. 5 types of table game. The 6th was invented in 1974. And that was invented by Gary Gygax. Now, wrap your head around that. We're sitting in the middle of the beginning of something that simply didn't exist until 50 years ago. And in historical terms, 50 years is nothing. 50 years is a blink. especially when you consider that span of time. And I hope, what I sincerely hope, Dylan, is that Gary's name will be etched into the base plate of tabletop role-playing games as one of the creators of it.
Yeah, that's I've heard you talk about Gary Con. Unfortunately I still haven't had a chance to go. I think it's around the corner, isn't it?
It is in March. It is in late March. I want to say the 20th, like the 18th to the 22nd or something like that. Avail yourself if you have the means. Please avail yourself. Go. It's one of those things that you should go to once. I kind of think when it comes to old school, I tend to think a little bit smaller, a little bit cozier, a little bit more chummy works better than great big and huge. There's this fascinating quote that I read, and I think it was in New Music Express, a British music magazine. It was back in the 90s, and they were talking to a couple of people who they were DJs. They were very invested in the Manchester rave scene, techno scene of the very early to mid 1990s, and always at events they would do, you would have rock stars show up, actual rock stars, and they named a few, like New Order showed up at a warehouse gig we were doing, and we turned them away. Why? Because we didn't want it to turn into that. We didn't want it to become the place to be seen, because you lose authenticity. And I think convention scene, particularly if you're honoring classic Dungeons and Dragons, something that unfortunately the copyright holders of the name Dungeons and Dragons currently eschew and treat like an embarrassing relative, you need that authenticity. And so, what you want in the halls are fat beards like me, right? Guys like us who are interested in going there and gaming, and less people who are interested in trying to be influencers. And, here's a selfie of me with, this other famous person who was there. So if you're going to go, if anyone's going to go, I recommend going now before you wake up in 5 or 6 years and it's as big as Gen Con.
Yeah, that's okay. You bring up a good point. I'll definitely will make an effort. I have a baby number 2 on the way coming January. So
congratulations, a January baby! Congratulations to you both. That is wonderful. As a January baby, I approve.
Well, I'll definitely appreciate that, my friend.
The world needs more Aquarians. Aquarians of the world, unite, but do it at your own pace, and it's not important to plan.
I'll be sure to keep that in mind as I watch them grow up. We actually, we're not finding out the gender this go around. We're going to leave it as a surprise and just kind of see what happens. But kind of talking about classic D&D. So from what I gather from looking at your YouTube channel and the things you have going on, mm-hmm. you're an old school guy, like you said.
Yes, I have I have shoes older than 5th edition, Dylan.
So what is it about 1st edition Advanced Dungeons and Dragons? What is it about it that just keeps you there?
Dylan, the answer to that, and I love giving it, is that it is where the black magic is. Advanced Dungeons and Dragons 1st edition is the Dungeons and Dragons of blood being needed for the Cacodemon spell. It's the Dungeons and Dragons of drow torture parlors. It's the Dungeons and Dragons of touch this and your character will die, no saving throw allowed. It is the Dungeons and Dragons that is, it's like Led Zeppelin or Black Sabbath. It borrows heavily from a lot of sources and assembles them together in a more or less aesthetically pleasing fashion. It's the Dungeons and Dragons that told us that half-orcs were fecund, and it sent you scrambling for the family dictionary because you wanted to know if fecund was actually a dirty word. It is the Dungeons and Dragons that dares you to take a bite of the apple and see eternity. It is where the black magic is, and I love every single iota of it.
I love that. So, what kind of dungeon master are you in this old school style? Are you more of a rules as written, or homebrew? I know you run modules. Do you ever create your? I know you've write your own. What's your style?
Well, it's interesting you bring this up because tonight we were talking about. Do you mind if I quote something? Do you mind if I quote something? Okay. I was stressing to my group. I wasn't stressing. I was stressing to them that the afterword of the Dungeon Master's Guide. I think Gary missed a beat. Gary should have put the afterword right in the front as part of the foreword. And it is this. It is the spirit of the game, not the letter of the rules, which is important. Never hold to the letter written, nor allow some barracks room lawyer to force quotations from the rulebook upon you if it goes against the obvious intent of the game. As you hew the line with respect to conformity to major systems and uniformity of play in general, also be certain the game is mastered by you and not your players. Within the broad parameters given in the Advanced Dungeons & Dragons volumes, you are the creator and final arbiter. By ordering things as they should be, the game as a whole first, your campaign next, and your participants thereafter, you will be playing Advanced Dungeons & Dragons as it was meant to be. May you find as much pleasure in doing so as the rest of us do. That is my gospel. That is my truth going forward when it comes to Advanced Dungeons & Dragons. I am an adversarial DM in that my DMing style is I could unleash any amount of horrors upon your character and wipe them out. But I'm not going to. I'm simply going to present a world that has those things in it. Where your character goes, what they do, and what happens to them when they go up to the big grinning green devil face on the wall of a place called the Tomb of Horrors and stick their head in. That's not me, the Dungeon Master, doing that. That's you walking up and jumping into a sphere of annihilation. I firmly believe that it is the Dungeon Master's place to present a world of absolute indifference. And if the party engages with it in a way that gets their characters rubbed out, they have no one to blame but themselves. As far as me doing stuff that's mean and too hard, I don't Dungeon Master too hard. I Dungeon Master just hard enough. The thing is, if you as a player do foolish things, you win foolish prizes. I don't cheat my players. I present the world as it is. The trick is not the trick is not making your game world too hard. It's making your game world just hard enough, and then exulting when the players win. When they overcome you as a dungeon master, you revel in it. It feels good to watch your players win. That's my kind of adversarial DMing, and that's the kind of DM that I tend to think I am.
And I resonate with that so well. So my wife, Bethany, is in here, and she games with me.
Oh, hello, Bethany. Good to see you.
We'll have a Q&A at the end of the show if you're okay with that, where you guys listening, if you want to come up and ask a question directly to the Dungeon Delver, you're more than welcome to do so. And, but that is definitely the style that I run.
Good.
I don't know if you know Jim Murphy on YouTube. There's a video he has where he talks about the different styles of play, and the one he talks about that I resonate with is he calls it hardcore, where death is cheap. And, if you're not careful, if you just walk into the room, who's to say what's going to happen to you? And it's sorry,
Right. Yes. I mean, exactly. And honestly, player education is the key. When players act rationally, anything is possible. I'm going to say something, and your audience may not agree with this. By the way, I hope, Bethany, I hope it's okay. I threw you a follow on Twitter there. I hope that's all right. But anyway, I can take a group of players, teach them how to play first edition Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. We can go through every dirty trick that I've got up my sleeve, every tell that you might pick up from me, give you players' handbooks to pick through carefully, to order your character stats, to buy equipment, so on and etc. And level those characters up over the course of a few months to about 5th level, 6th level maybe. Let's say 7th. We'll say 7th. Give you a few utility magic items if you haven't gotten them, and send that party of, we'll say, 8 adventurers through the Tomb of Horrors, and they're going to make it out. If they've paid a single bit of attention, if they've watched, if they've listened, if they've learned the cardinal rule, do not touch, then they're going to make it out. Give me a group of 10 people who are completely inexperienced. They know Dungeons & Dragons from Stranger Things. They played the 5e introductory set once. And I'll give them 2 characters each of 12th level, and we'll sit down and play Tomb of Horrors. We'll be done in about an hour and a half because all of their characters will be dead. It is about what players can learn and observe in the world and then act with their characters accordingly. And that is one thing that I love about Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, is you have to bring your knowledge to the table and you have to think critically and not just rely what's on a piece of paper.
Mm-hmm. And that's something that my groups, it's funny, because I play 5th edition, but I very much run a very hard, challenging game. And mm-hmm. I tell my players, like, look, this copy of the player's handbook, this is mine. I want you to imagine that my name is next to the author. It's like, don't expect to find everything that you read the way it is at my table. And that's something that we often say. If something crazy happens, like, man, yeah, knowledge is power. Yeah. And what is your fondest memory of this hobby as a whole? I know we talked about Gary. Is it that, or is it anything that has ever happened at the table that just sticks with you over all these years?
Getting into some inside baseball and setting aside just personal interactions, I would say probably my fondest memory. Gosh, 99.99% of that is as a dungeon master. I'm going to say, probably, the long running. I've got a 10-year campaign that's been going. We run on Monday nights. That's not live streamed or anything. That's just a group we get together. I'm going to say probably, our run through Lost Caverns of Sojconth. That was a great moment. The final showdown with poor Drelsna, and her duel with the players. They didn't kill her, by the way. She's still out there. So if any of my players come back to listen to this later, what can I tell you?
She's out there.
She's out there. And they're actually aware that she's out there, but that is such a fun module, and it's so much fun to run. So I would say of recent memory, because I mean, gosh, we're talking about thousands of games that I've played over the years. So I would have to take the most recent Lost Caverns of Sojconth run.
Nice. Speaking of Lost Caverns of Sojconth, I have a question. Did you ever get around to running the Queen of the Demon Web Pits?
That is on my to-do list. That is on my bucket list. And I don't mean that I'm gonna, kick off, and we all are eventually, right? But I don't have any plans. I don't have anything specific on my calendar as far as dropping dead. But, the Monday night group, I am, trying to level them, up. And a couple of my players know they're veterans of first edition AD&D. They know that I want to run it. And every time I think like, okay, they're average 8th level. I could start the giant series. They could survive this. And I'll throw 25 giant ticks at them in my own Castle Greyhawk. And it's a near total party kill. And I'm like, oh, right. Okay. They need a little bit more toughening up before we, yes. So, I undertake to keep my enthusiasm in check, but I am champing at the bit to run Queen of the Demon Web Pits. Yes, I am.
Nice. Okay. A couple more questions, and then I'll open it up to the audience. Have these games ever impacted or moved you on a personal level?
Can you be a bit more precise?
Yeah, sure. So, like, have you ever played? I know you run most of your games, and so do I. But has something ever happened on the table where whatever had happened like impacted you on a personal level? Like, for example, one of my characters is playing a paladin, and she's going through a lot of trials and tribulations, and a lot of the things that are happening. Her having to deal with ruling a kingdom that's destroyed and everything else, and like all these problems, everything just going wrong. It's just helping her as a person, I guess, deal with stressors in her life, if that makes sense.
Oh, I've got you. I'll cite a couple of things. The moment, and this is not a specific moment, but I'll cite something specific in a moment that's ancillary to this. But the moment when you, as a dungeon master, take your hands off of what's going on and step back, and the game continues. The players continue to interact with each other in character. I had a fighter, a chaotic neutral fighter. If you're out there listening, hello, Chris. I hope you're well. But she and a fellow who was playing a cleric in character with other players supporting either side of the argument. When I stepped up to go to the kitchen to get some food or something like that, had a religious debate, an in-game religious debate. They role-played to themselves. I don't know if that made their lives better or something like that, but when I realized what was going on, I literally just stood in the kitchen sipping my beer and just nodding and just saying, yes. This is good. And that made me feel good. That was an affirmation that I had done a good job as a dungeon master. And they were excellent role players also. Don't misunderstand me. They were excellent role players. But the other moment, I literally gave a player, Stacy, I gave her, really, really bad fright, like a horror movie level of fright, right? We were playing a game, and I love finding creepy things to put in dungeon crawls. And I don't know if you or any of your listeners are familiar with this. It is literally one of the first quote-unquote creepypastas. It's called Ted the Caver. You familiar with it?
No, I don't think I've heard of that.
Ted the Caver, go out and find it. I'm not going to spoil it for anyone. If you don't know Ted the Caver, look up Ted the Caver. It's hosted on Angel Fire. It is posted like an early 2000s, late 90s. Like there's no blog. It's just HTML pages posted up over and over with tiny little pictures like the size on a modern monitor of a few postage stamps. But Ted the Caver is about a pair of spelunkers and something that happened in a cave. And I ported that into an AD&D game. And so the characters are going through a natural cave part of a dungeon. And I'm like, okay, you pass a shaft. It's about 4 feet off the ground. It's roughly this big. And character's like, well, my half elf is going to shuck her armor and crawl through there and see what's going on. And I just started, we were here at home, but I had my laptop up. So I very quickly pulled it up and I started describing some of the things. And when she got to a point where the party could no longer see her or hear her, I said, okay, Stace, come on. And we went out into the kitchen, out of my office, out of earshot of everyone. And I'm describing this, and her hair was standing on end. She was getting really, 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 really creeped out. And she's a good friend of mine. She wasn't getting creeped out just because she was standing in the kitchen with me. So save it, everyone. But yeah, so we finished up the game. Her character survived. She made it out. So I'm sitting there and I get like a private message, Google message or something like that. She said, "Thanks, I'm sleeping with all the lights on. That was horrible. Thank you." And it's been, and that was, easily 10 years ago, 8, 9, 10 years ago. And she was, legitimately horrified by it. And that was an uplifting moment for me as a game master. I felt like, yes, I did a good thing there, which I guess I shouldn't be glad that I terrorized someone, but it's scary like The Exorcist or scary like The Shining, it's you
Right.
get a little adrenaline thrill. But as far as meaningful life moments, I'd have to step out to the meta and just say the wonderful people I've met along the way, rather than any one event in a game.
I can relate with that because my experience, I feel like the friendships that I've made at the table have been unlike any other friendship that I could ever kind of garnish. I don't know if you relate with that as well.
No, I do. Absolutely. I have met some amazing individuals that I hope I know until, greetings, Dungeon Minister. By the way, if I can, quick plug Dungeon Minister. He has his own channel on YouTube. It's marvelous. Please go subscribe to Dungeon Minister on YouTube. The people I've met, one of my dear friends, Aurora Williams, I've known her now for 13 years, never met her. We met through friends playing Left 4 Dead 2. And after we'd played Left 4 Dead 2 for a little while and I talked about D&D and she talked about role-playing games, I said, hey, I should set up a game and we'll play it. Have you heard of this thing called Roll20? And she's like, yeah, and check that out. So, that started the Monday campaign, which has now been going for 10 years. She's a plank owner, as they say in the military. She's a plank owner of that game. And, I am so glad that I got to know her. I've met, just a great many wonderful, wonderful people through this hobby.
And even Gary Gygax himself.
Gary Gygax himself, Alan Hammock, Errol Otis. Let's see. It's going to sound too much like bragging. I've met a lot of TSR royalty. For a little while, Tracy Lesh, who actually created the Mind Flayer. The Mind Flayer was created by Tracy Lesh. Tracy lived just up the highway from me here in Central Florida, and he and I used to hang out. And we still game. He's in the Monday night group now, I got to meet Tracy. I got to. If you don't own a copy of this, Dylan, shame on you, but everyone should pick up a copy of Art and Arcana: A Visual History.
Yes, I do have a copy.
Good. So everybody knows Errol Otis and Dave Trampier and Dave Sutherland and David S. LaForce. Way too many Davids at TSR. And all of the first edition and so on artists. But I was interested in getting to know the original D&D artists because who really knows about Greg Bell, about Deb Larson, or Tracy Lesh for that matter. So when I decided I'm going to interview those guys, And I reached out to Tracy on Facebook, had his location information. I'm like, my gosh, you live in this suburb in Florida. Why don't we get together? So my meeting Tracy story is that I cyber stalked him.
Nice.
But yeah, it's just that chance to get to know people,
Absolutely. Again, Dungeon Delver, I thank you so much for your time and willing to talk to me. That's all I really had. So everyone in the audience, if anyone wants to come up and ask a question, I think Dungeon Delver is okay with that.
Get on the mic.
So there is a little bit of a delay between the speakers and the listeners. So I'll be watching. It looks like we have some requests already.
Excellent.
Looks like my wife wants to come up and ask a question here.
Of course. It's an honor.
All right, Bethany, whenever you're ready.
Hi. I texted Dylan at like the beginning whenever you guys first started talking, and I was like, do I have to wait to the end to ask my questions? Like as soon as you started talking, I was like, wait, I have questions. I have things I want to ask. Thank you for coming and for sharing your story and your experiences. It sounds like you and Dylan run like pretty similar games in like the challenging but fair, adventurous kind of style of game. So it's just been really interesting to hear what you have to say and know how Dylan runs and just kind of see how they compare. Um, so my question for you, I'm going to go all the way back to like the very beginning when you guys first started talking. And you were talking about how maybe a player that's more engaged at the table would level up quicker than somebody who maybe is playing on their phone, not paying attention as much, maybe not as engaged or interactive in the game. We had a campaign going that was probably destined to fail from the beginning. I feel like all of the characters came in with like 100 secrets that they weren't willing to share. That we were very standoffish characters in a game where like you're supposed to have camaraderie, right, and like all work together towards a goal or whatever. But one of the players leveled up earlier than the rest of us, and it created such animosity in the whole group. Like everyone was so aggravated that he was a whole level above everybody else. I mean, even I was kind of like, gosh, why did he get an extra level? And Dylan was like, it's just where he landed and the situation he was presented and how he handled it. Like he got the extra level. And everyone was aggravated with Dylan for allowing him to level up sooner, and it just created like chaos amongst the group. And the group ended in a TPK. We all like could not see on the same page. We ended up going into a battle that we were not ready for or seeing eye to eye with. And so what would be your advice like in a situation like that where maybe a character does deserve to level up sooner? How do you present it to the group and maybe make it acceptable for the party?
Well, first of all, let me just say thank you. That's a great question. Now, understand, I'm coming from first edition Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, which is staggered in its character leveling. A thief, for example, to go to from first to second level requires 1,251 experience points. A fighter requires 2,500. So you can see very clearly there's going to be an immediate disparity. The thief will level up faster. A multi-classed character must divide their XP over all of their levels. So a fighter, magic user, thief, for example, would have to take 3,000 XP and put 1,000 towards their fighterhood, 1,000 towards their thieving, and 1,000 towards their magic use. And they're going to level up slower than anyone. So it is built in to Advanced Dungeons and Dragons that will happen. But, and I apologize because I meander. Just in case you hadn't picked up on that, I tend to wander, because the question was asked and I didn't answer, and I apologize, Dylan. how do I deal with characters of different level in the party? And the reality is it happens. The Monday night game, we just had a new player come. I didn't tell her to, but she rolled up a first level character. The average party level is 8th. So she'll be a first level character, but because the party is fighting monsters and overcoming challenges and acquiring treasure, that for their level is netting them thousands and thousands and thousands of experience points, she'll level up pretty quickly. It will even out. As for dealing with the interpersonal side on it, I think if from the get-go you explain to the players, let's say, Bethany, you're at the table one night and I'm not. We're both playing. And you're part of a group that slays an adult green dragon and gets all of his treasure, and you go back to town and you do whatever the mechanism in 5e is, and then I'm like, my character returns from the distant village where he was visiting his mother. Well, guess what? You all may be a level or a half level or more above my character, and that's just something I have to cope with. I think if the dungeon master communicates to the players that, one, you are to, you're to play your character to the best of your ability, and two, XP rewards are not equally given out because you may not, you might not be here, you might not, I'm watching you, I'm seeing who's on their phone. I'm seeing who's paying attention and that sort of thing. But as far as dealing with the attitude from, why did he get to level, and we didn't, the DM is the final arbiter. And even if it irritates the players momentarily, I would think that adversity would create impetus that they would then strive to be better players. But you hit on something, I think, Bethany, that is of paramount importance for any player, for any group of players, and that is cooperation. Cooperation is key. Everybody has to be on the same sheet of music, whether you're a couple of second level thieves and a gaggle of first level fighters, backed up by a magic user and a cleric who's almost second level. Everybody has to be on the same page when it comes to your tactics and your behaviors. Otherwise, you'll get the regrettable situation that happened at the end of your campaign. And I hope that answers your question.
It does. Thank you.
Quite welcome.
Yeah, thank you again, Dungeon Delver. Does anyone else? I think we have time for maybe one more question. Does anyone else have anything they want to ask? You can hit that microphone button to request to speak, and I can bring you up on stage.
This is your chance to mouth off to me. So, anyone, Dungeon Minister? I know Father Aaron, so anyone at all. Otherwise, you'll have to listen to me talk, and you won't get a chance to say anything yourselves.
Going once. Going twice. All right. Well, you have any parting words for us, Dungeon Delver?
Kill the bastards. I'm kidding. For players, avoid unnecessary encounters. Don't fight if you don't have to. For dungeon masters, again, you don't have to make the game world too hard for your players. You just have to make it just hard enough. And for everyone else, have fun. This is a game where you can make wonderful friends and great memories. Do horror stories abound? Absolutely. But for goodness sake, life is too short. Enjoy yourselves. Have fun. Eat pizza. Drink soda. And just enjoy the game, regardless of what it is. Enjoy the game and enjoy yourselves.
Thank you all for coming to the table. Until next time. Remember to always master your game.